From 1942 to 1945, the Pacific Theater presented one of the most unusual and demanding combat environments of the Second World War. Unlike the sweeping tank battles of North Africa or the vast air campaigns over Europe, fighting in the Pacific often boiled down to brutal contests for small patches of jungle-covered islands. Dense vegetation reduced visibility to just a few yards, and firefights frequently took place at ranges under 30 yards. In this unforgiving setting, where ambushes and sudden charges were the norm, the United States Marine Corps brought a weapon into action that the Japanese military had neither anticipated nor prepared to counter: the 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. Although official records offer only limited accounts of its battlefield use, the presence of the Winchester Model 1897 and Model 1912 in Marine units gave American forces a distinct tactical edge in certain situations. These weapons were never the primary arms of the infantry, but their unique characteristics made them especially suited to close-quarters combat in the jungles of Guadalcanal, New Guinea, and later campaigns. For decades before the war, the Imperial Japanese Army had studied and cataloged Western military equipment. Their doctrine absorbed lessons from British bolt-action rifles, American machine guns, French mortars, and even Soviet submachine guns captured in conflicts like the Russo-Japanese War and battles in Manchuria. Yet shotguns were dismissed as irrelevant to warfare. In Japanese eyes, they were little more than hunting tools used by sportsmen in Europe and America. This oversight carried consequences once the United States deployed thousands of military-grade shotguns into the Pacific Theater. By 1945, American forces had fielded roughly 25,000 Winchester Model 97s and an estimated 60,000 to 80,000 Model 12s, ensuring their steady presence across multiple campaigns. Japan's military doctrine in 1942 leaned heavily on morale, spiritual strength, and close combat superiority to compensate for material disadvantages. The country's industrial limitations were stark. Japan's annual steel output roughly equaled the amount the United States produced in a single month. With such a gap in resources, Japanese planners emphasized the fighting spirit and skill of individual soldiers. Training stressed bayonet use, hand-to-hand fighting, and aggressive night infiltration tactics. The idea was simple. Where American or British firepower seemed overwhelming, Japanese infantry would infiltrate under cover of darkness, slip past defenses, and overwhelm positions in sudden, close-range assaults. This approach had worked effectively against poorly prepared Chinese forces in the 1930s, and even achieved some success against Western troops early in the Pacific War. But American shotguns undercut the core of this doctrine. The very environment where Japanese soldiers expected to dominate, dense jungle, limited visibility, and close range, was precisely where shotguns proved most effective. Consider the Winchester Model 97, a pump-action shotgun designed by John Browning and first produced in the late 19th century. In Marine hands, it became a devastating tool. Equipped with a short 20-inch barrel for maneuverability, a perforated steel heat shield, and a bayonet lug that allowed attachment of the M1917 sword bayonet, it was purpose-built for trench and jungle warfare. Its most fearsome feature was the ability to slam fire. Unlike modern pump shotguns that require releasing the trigger between shots, the Model 97 could be fired continuously as long as the trigger was held down and the action was pumped. In practical terms, this meant a Marine could unleash all 6 rounds in the magazine in a matter of seconds. The ammunition itself amplified the weapon's effectiveness. The standard 12-gauge Guerrero buckshot cartridge contained 9 .33 caliber lead pellets. At ranges of 10 to 30 yards, typical engagement distances in Pacific jungles, these pellets spread into a wide pattern that required little precise aiming. Each pull of the trigger could hit multiple targets or ensure a devastating impact on a single opponent. In a sudden jungle ambush, the shotgun gave Marines a weapon that was faster, more lethal, and more forgiving than a rifle. The Model 12, introduced later, built upon Browning's foundation with refinements by designer T.C. Johnson. Lighter, with an internal hammer that reduced mechanical complexity, it gradually became the standard Marine shotgun by 1943. Still, Both the Model 97 and Model 12 served side by side throughout the war, with no real distinction in frontline use. For Japanese infantry, this was a shock. Their bayonet charges, meant to intimidate and overwhelm, could be broken apart in seconds by a Marine armed with a shotgun. The sound of a pump-action shotgun cycling in the darkness was often enough to halt infiltration attempts. In the brutal night battles on Guadalcanal, such as those around Henderson Field, the psychological effect of concentrated buckshot at close range cannot be understated. Yet, for all their potential, shotguns faced limitations that prevented them from becoming decisive weapons. The most serious problem was ammunition. Early in the war, American shotguns used paper-hulled shells. In the wet, humid climate of the Pacific, these cartridges absorbed moisture, swelled, and frequently jammed. Marines often reported having to hammer shells into the chamber, a fatal flaw in the middle of combat. This issue persisted through most of the war and was only resolved in 1945 with the introduction of all-brass M19 shotgun shells, by which time the major campaigns were nearly over. Despite this, the Marines institutionalized shotgun training. Technical Manual TM 9285, published in September 1942, outlined proper use of the Model 97 and Model 12, as well as other makes like the Remington Model 11. Shotguns were assigned roles in perimeter defense, jungle patrols, and close-quarters clearing operations. Each Marine division was officially authorized over 300 shotguns, but these still represented less than 2% of its small arms inventory. Their deployment was always limited and specialized rather than widespread. In practice, Marines found them most effective in three contexts: as the lead weapon on jungle patrols, for nighttime perimeter defense, and for guarding prisoners. Patrol point men valued the shotgun's instant stopping power in an ambush. At night, its spread gave defenders confidence against infiltrators trying to crawl into American lines. For prisoner control, the intimidation factor alone made it useful. Still, the shotgun never achieved the same reputation as the M1 Garand, the Bar, or even the Thompson submachine gun. Its role was too narrow, its ammunition supply too fragile, and its overall impact too small to influence the broader campaign. Japanese forces never even bothered to develop countermeasures against it. Unlike Germany in World War I, which protested American use of trench shotguns as inhumane, Japan largely ignored them. The story of the shotgun in the Pacific War is, in many respects, one of promise that was never fully realized. It was a weapon that seemed perfectly suited to the dense terrain and brutal close-quarter encounters of the island campaigns. Yet it was held back by logistical flaws, technical problems, and its relatively minor role in overall strategy. Marines who carried them remembered their power in ambushes and patrols, but when the war was over, few considered the shotgun a decisive factor in the defeat of Imperial Japan. Instead, it became a symbol, a reminder that even simple weapons could create fear and exert psychological influence far beyond their actual battlefield. Importance. Ammunition performance played a critical role in shaping how these weapons were used. The standard 12-gauge 000 buckshot cartridge was deadly in close combat, spreading about 10 inches at 10 yards, 20 inches at 20 yards, and roughly 30 inches at 30 yards. In thick jungle, where visibility was poor and engagements happened suddenly at close range, this spread was ideal. A single shell, carrying 9.33 caliber lead pellets, could inflict devastating damage on an enemy squad in seconds. On paper, this made the shotgun seem like the perfect jungle weapon. The Guadalcanal campaign of 1942-43 offered the first major opportunity for Marines to test them in combat. Guadalcanal was the United States' first large-scale offensive in the Pacific, and Marines brought shotguns ashore along with their rifles, bars, and machine guns. During the Battle of Alligator Creek on August 21, 1942, nearly 800 Japanese soldiers died in a failed assault against Marine positions. Most of the killing was done by machine guns, mortars, and even improvised anti-tank rounds. Shotguns were present, particularly in patrols and perimeter defense, but they were not credited with decisive contributions. Still, they earned respect among the Marines who carried them, especially in sudden clashes in the jungle. Yet the Pacific climate exposed one of the shotgun's greatest weaknesses: its ammunition. At the time, standard American shotgun shells were made with paper hulls. In the humidity and rainfall of the South Pacific, these cartridges absorbed moisture, swelled, and often refused to chamber properly. Marines complained that in some cases the shells had to be hammered into the weapon to fire, something completely impractical in combat. This flaw remained unresolved for most of the war. Only in March 1945, with the introduction of the all-brass M19 shotgun shell, did the problem disappear. Unfortunately, by then the great campaigns of the Pacific, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, Leyte Gulf, had already been fought, and the shotgun had missed its chance to prove itself on a large scale. Despite these setbacks, the U.S. military institutionalized shotgun use through training and doctrine. Technical Manual TM 9285, published in September 1942, provided standardized instruction on a range of models, including the Winchester Model 97 and Model 12, the Remington Model 11, and designs by Stevens and Ithaca. Marines were trained to use shotguns in specific roles: point defense during patrols, nighttime protection of perimeters, clearing bunkers or trenches, and controlling prisoners. By 1943, Marine divisions were authorized 306 shotguns each. However, this represented less than 2% of their total small arms, showing clearly that the shotgun was seen as a specialized tool rather than a mainline combat weapon. Interestingly, the Japanese never protested against American shotgun use. In World War I, Germany had lodged formal complaints, calling them inhumane and threatening to execute captured soldiers carrying them. Japan, however, did not see them as a threat significant enough to mention in wartime manuals or post-war analyses. Their doctrine adapted to American firepower in general: machine guns, flamethrowers, and artillery, but the shotgun was too marginal to warrant any attention. The U.S. Army also experimented with shotguns in New Guinea, where the terrain was thick, visibility limited, and patrols often stumbled into firefights at just a few yards. In theory, the shotgun should have been invaluable. In practice, the moisture problem with shells again crippled its usefulness. Soldiers often abandoned them in favor of more reliable weapons, such as the M1 Garand rifle, the Thompson submachine gun, or the Browning automatic rifle. Where the shotgun truly excelled was in three roles: jungle patrols, perimeter defense, and prisoner control. Patrol leaders frequently armed the point man with a shotgun. The ability to unleash a devastating spread of buckshot in the event of an ambush gave the patrol precious seconds to respond. At night, when Japanese infiltration tactics were at their peak, the shotgun was an effective deterrent. Marines often said that even the distinctive sound of a pump shotgun being cycled in the darkness could discourage an attack. In urban fighting, such as the brutal Battle of Manila in 1945, shotguns again found a place. They proved useful in house-to-house combat where close-quarters firepower was essential. However, Japanese defenders quickly adapted, fortifying positions with barriers that reduced the weapon's effectiveness. At Iwo Jima and Okinawa, despite hundreds of authorized shotguns, the nature of combat again limited their role. The volcanic rock of Iwo Jima and the intricate defensive fortifications of Okinawa demanded flamethrowers, satchel charges, and artillery. Compared to these heavy weapons, the shotgun was a footnote. The arrival of brass-cased shells in 1945 meant that, finally, the shotgun could perform without jamming. But by that time, the war was entering its final phase, and larger weapons determined the outcome. Perhaps the most telling measure of the shotgun's limited role is the absence of references in Marine memoirs. Two of the most famous first-hand accounts of the Pacific War, Eugene Sledge's With the Old Breed and Robert Leckey's Helmet for My Pillow, make no mention of shotguns at all. For veterans, the weapons that defined their war were the Garand, the bar, the machine gun, and the flamethrower. Those who did carry shotguns remembered them fondly for guard duty, jungle ambushes, and prisoner control, but not as tools that changed battles. In the end, the shotgun in the Pacific War was both useful and forgettable. It fit the terrain, and in certain situations it was unmatched. Yet it was undermined by poor ammunition design, limited deployment, and the overwhelming dominance of other weapons systems. The Marine with a shotgun became an image of American grit and ingenuity, but the reality was that artillery barrages, naval bombardments, tanks, and air power broke Japanese resistance. The shotgun's legacy is not that it won battles, but that it embodied the Marine ethos of adaptability, making use of every tool available, even one better suited to duck hunting than global war. The production figures for combat shotguns during World War II tell an impressive story at first glance. Tens of thousands of weapons rolled off the assembly lines of Winchester, Remington, Stevens, and Ithaca. In total, American factories produced well over 100,000 military-grade shotguns between 1941 and 1945. These numbers reflected the overwhelming industrial capacity of the United States, which by the middle of the war was turning out more weapons than all of its enemies combined. Yet when it comes to the battlefield record of these shotguns, the story is far less dramatic. Production strength did not translate into tactical impact. Many of these weapons never saw frontline action. Instead, they were distributed to training camps, used by guards in rear areas, or stored at naval bases where their intimidation factor made them suitable for security. When researchers study wartime supply chains and requisitions, the gap becomes even more obvious. Repair part requests, ammunition allocations, and field reports reveal that only a small percentage of the weapons issued were ever carried into combat zones, and fewer still were fired in battle. The contrast between production numbers and frontline presence is striking. The American war machine was capable of producing vast quantities of almost any weapon, but this did not guarantee that each item played a decisive role in the outcome of the war. The shotgun was one of the clearest examples of this imbalance between production scale and battlefield necessity. This reality is reinforced when we look at the practices of other Allied powers. The British, Australians, Soviets, and Chinese all faced combat environments where shotguns might have been effective, especially in jungles, cities, or trench networks. Yet none of these nations invested heavily in the weapon. Instead, they relied on standard infantry rifles like the Lee Enfield, Mosin Nagant, or Type 38 Arisaka, supported by submachine guns and light machine guns. These weapons were easier to supply, had greater range, and were seen as more versatile. In practice, the Allies achieved similar results without deploying shotguns in any meaningful way. This comparison underscores that the U.S. shotgun was never a war-winning innovation, but rather a supplementary tool that remained outside the mainstream of global infantry tactics. After the Second World War, the shotgun slipped further into the margins of military thought. Post-war studies by the U.S. Army and Marine Corps gave little serious attention to its role. Unlike the M1 Garand, the Browning automatic rifle, or the .30 caliber machine gun, all of which earned lasting reputations as decisive weapons, the shotgun was rarely even mentioned in official analyses of lessons learned. In Korea, where the rugged mountains and long-range engagements resembled Europe more than the jungles of the Pacific, the shotgun was almost invisible. Its short range and specialized ammunition made it irrelevant in that environment. Vietnam offered a limited revival, but even there the shotgun remained a niche weapon. Dense jungles, sudden ambushes, and close-quarter fights inside tunnels or villages did create situations where it could be effective. U.S. forces once again issued pump-action and semi-automatic shotguns to point men on patrols, tunnel rats, and special units. They proved valuable in these roles, but they were still never issued in numbers comparable to rifles or machine guns. Even in a conflict where terrain and tactics seemed ideal, the shotgun did not become a standard infantry weapon. Today, the military use of the shotgun is even more narrowly defined. Modern forces employ them primarily for breaching operations, using special shells to blast open locked doors, or for riot control with less lethal ammunition. They are not standard battlefield arms. This evolution highlights a pattern that began in the Pacific War. The shotgun could be useful in certain narrow contexts, but it never became central to the way modern armies fought wars. The conclusion is clear. Although shotguns were present in Marine divisions throughout the Pacific War, their actual combat role was limited. They were handicapped by unreliable paper-hulled ammunition, which absorbed moisture in the humid climate and frequently jammed. They were restricted by logistics, since carrying specialized shells was an added burden in supply chains already stretched across thousands of miles of ocean. And they were constrained by tactical reality, since most battles in the Pacific were decided by heavier firepower, artillery barrages, naval bombardments, airstrikes, flamethrowers, and tanks. In these contests of industrial strength, the shotgun was simply too small to matter. The Japanese never developed countermeasures against American shotguns because they never needed to. While they adapted to the threat of flamethrowers by constructing deep concrete bunkers or to artillery by dispersing forces and digging into terrain, they ignored the shotgun altogether. Its impact was too minor to register in their doctrine or training. This silence from the enemy's side reinforces what the historical record already shows. The shotgun may have been feared in individual encounters, but it was not strategically important. What is striking is the way popular culture later magnified its role. Films, novels, and even video games have often portrayed Marines storming through Pacific jungles with pump-action shotguns, cutting down Japanese soldiers at point-blank range. The imagery is dramatic and it resonates with audiences because the shotgun is such a familiar civilian weapon. In American culture, it represents raw stopping power, simplicity, and ruggedness. This symbolism has, over time, overshadowed the more restrained truth, that the weapon was present but peripheral, effective in moments but never decisive in campaigns. In reality, the forces that brought about Japan's defeat were overwhelming American firepower and logistics. Naval artillery flattened shore defenses before landings. Carrier-based aircraft shredded supply lines and bombed positions deep inland. Tanks, flamethrowers, and demolition teams destroyed the elaborate cave systems and bunkers on islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa. These were the tools that determined victory. The shotgun, by comparison, was a footnote, and yet its legacy should not be dismissed entirely. For the Marines who carried them, shotguns offered confidence on nighttime perimeter duty, or reassurance when leading a jungle patrol. They were intimidating to prisoners and deadly in ambushes. In these moments, the weapon justified its place in the arsenal, even if it never earned a larger role. Its true legacy lies not in shifting the outcome of battles, but in what it represented: adaptability, resourcefulness, and the ability of American troops to make use of every available tool. The myth of the shotgun in the Pacific, of a weapon that embodied American toughness in the harshest conditions, endures because it speaks to something deeper than battlefield statistics. It represents the spirit of the Marine who would carry any weapon, face any terrain, and find a way to fight. History shows that shotguns were secondary tools, not decisive weapons, but mythology shows they were symbols of American ingenuity and fighting spirit. Both truths coexist, and together they explain why the shotgun, despite its modest combat record, still holds a place in the story of the Pacific War.